was with my mother when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. I was with her when she was told her cancer had returned. I was also with her the day she died 5 years after her original diagnosis. She was only 49 years old. She was my hero and she was gone. I was determined to empower myself to avoid the same fate. I took action by focusing on prevention, and I monitored my efforts with medical infrared technology, or what some would call breast thermography. After utilizing my strategy for over 20 years, I relocated from Los Angeles to San Luis Obispo, California. I soon discovered that most doctors and women in the area were not aware of thermography. This was unacceptable to me. I changed course and I became a board-certified medical thermographer. It was my mission to empower local women and doctors in my community with the state-of-the-art technology. So as I continued down my journey, I decided to go ahead and advertise and let women know that thermography is a wonderful alternative and option for women who do not want to have mammograms. I mean, even the United States government warned us that, mammograms could be dangerous and actually lead to cancer and or metastasize existing cancer. So I finally felt vindicated that I was right all those years, and I know that the radiologist groups and the cancer societies and even the FDA have basically sided with the companies and organizations who have a vested interest in mammography, and that's very disturbing. So I wanted to make sure that, because they have the kind of financial power to really get out there and advertise and brainwash women into whatever they want to try to manipulate us into utilizing. When I decided that I wanted to put the word out that thermography is a wonderful alternative for women of all ages, all breast types, totally non-invasive. It's just about collecting information that's unique to you. All of a sudden, it seemed to be that I had basically poked the hornet's nest.
Ladies, are you looking for an alternative to mammograms? Breast thermography is focused on prevention and earliest detection. No radiation, no compression. Learn why more women and doctors are turning to breast thermography.
Who knew that this simple commercial would cause such a firestorm? This led to an unexpected turn of events. Not only were hundreds of women sharing their personal horror stories with me, stories of deception, bullying, unrelenting fear, and brutality, but doctors were also coming forward with warnings of dangerous medical practices commonly used. This was not just at a local level, it was much bigger than that. My partner and I were determined to give the victims and advocates a collective voice. Efforts in doing so triggered a campaign by those with a vested interest to silence us. We had poked a hornet's nest worth multi-billions of dollars annually. Their false and misleading propaganda included press releases, aggressive advertising, and even FDA warning letters, not only to us, but also to others who were attempting to expose the fraud and collusion. Their effort to protect their extraordinarily successful business model is backfiring. More and more women are questioning and demanding answers, and hundreds of doctors are also insisting the curtain of lies be pulled back to reveal what some would consider criminal action by those complicit in this corporate-driven, government-sanctioned barbarism. How many more women will suffer and die because critical information is deliberately kept from them?
So what about mammography? Mammography is the greatest fraud ever perpetrated upon women in this nation, and indeed in the world. The initial trials done in New York and in Sweden were frauds. We now know that. They excluded women. For instance, if you were in the study and you died, then you were excluded from the study because you didn't finish the study. Well, what a great way to skew the data. Women that did well were counted twice in some of the studies. So right from the inception, there was deception.
Mammography is not all that it's cracked up to be, and there are serious critics of mammography. When they form panels to assess the prudence of continuing with a standard of mammography for breast cancer detection, they frequently experience from members of their own panel, including, for example, Dr. Charles B. Simone, that this is not the way to go, that this is a seriously flawed approach, that actually the testing can increase your risk of breast cancer, But in addition to that, it's not that successful in enabling women to understand when they have breast cancer or detect it in enough time to give them any reasonable chance of fending off the occurrence of it.
In my 21 years of experience of seeing patients being caught in this system that only propagates inflammation, that has caused me to come to the point where if it's my wife and my daughter, no, I'm not going to have them have a mammogram as my recommendation. Certainly, they're individuals unto themselves and they can make that decision, but it would be my recommendation to find a better technology. And I would guide them in that and say, you know what? If you do thermography, you're going to have an opportunity to see these inflammatory patterns many years before it could ever be visualized as a mass on a mammogram, and you're not going to be irradiating yourself, thereby increasing your potential to create a cancer.
Society needs to be re-educated on the worth or lack of worth of mammography, because I think it's a travesty.
And many recent studies show that women who get their annual mammogram are at higher risk for breast cancer, probably from the radiation, probably partly from the incredible pressure put on the breasts to create the mammography picture.
Mammography is an outdated study. It is a study that makes no sense. It makes no sense because you are putting 44 pounds of pressure on the breast, which is the equivalent of 3 bowling balls, so take that as a visual. You are radiating women, and you're trying to find out if they have a disease that's caused by radiation by giving them radiation, which in itself makes it illogical.
So when my mom died of breast cancer, and again, I'm looking at my patients getting younger and younger and younger, and even if they're following what's, said, like, so you get your mammogram, and, at young ages, it's not so good because you can't really see through the breast tissue with that. So a lot of times people present with tumors that weren't caught, that way. And then, they have to have surgery and maybe mutilating surgery and additional treatments on top of that, even if they have stage 1 disease.
New England Journal of Medicine, there was a 30-year study on mammograms and how it had affected the rate of breast cancer, and they said there was 31% false positives, which amounted to 1.3 million false positives in women over the age of 40 in the last 30 years, 70,000 false positives in 2008. And these women's breasts were all cut off. They were given chemotherapy and radiation, told they were cured, and they're put in the cure column as great advertisements for the benefits of mammograms, and guess what? They never had breast cancer to begin with. And it will make you weep when you see what's been done to our women.
And the head of the American Cancer Association, whose name is Otis Brawley, who's a physician, has said things like, we need a 21st century definition of cancer, we need a better breast test, and most recently, the comment which is, we're way over treating cancers because most breast cancers, when found on diagnostic testing, would not cause a significant change in the longevity of the woman that we're testing, because the cancer that has been found is not a cancer that's life-threatening. And they're doing it on patients with DCIS, which not only the American Cancer Society, but a number of physicians are saying, why are we treating DCIS like cancer when it isn't?
Breast calcifications seem to be on the rise. Breast calcifications can occur because you're taking calcium supplementations without a balancing amount of magnesium. The magnesium will dissolve the calcium and not let it build up in breast tissue or heel spurs or kidney stones or gallstones or even fibromyalgia scar tissue. This is where calcium will precipitate, and it's also precipitating in our blood vessels, in our arteries, causing heart disease. And we've got 3 new studies, British Medical Journal, showing that women who take calcium supplements are building up calcium in their arteries and are at higher risk for heart disease. So it's also building up in breast tissue. The signifier for calcification in the breast for a doctor is, oh, it could be a sign of cancer. So they immediately go crazy. They want to do a mammogram, more mammograms, they want to do a biopsy. They want to actually say it's precancerous, but it probably is just calcification. they will call it DCIS, the precancerous form of breast cancer, and actually in the statistics say, oh, well, we cured this by doing the biopsy. Really, they're just taking out this breast calcification from the overuse of calcium in our society.
I'm not going to tell you not to get a mammogram because there have been some instances where other technologies have missed the cyst or the tumor, and mammography has found it. However, it does not come without its particular problems and side effects. So if we cut to the chase, to me this study says it all. There was a 25-year Canadian study that was done on women between the age of 40 to 59, and this was done on 90,000 women. So 25 years, 90,000 women. And they found that mammograms did not reduce breast cancer mortality rate, not even by 1%. And that a mammogram was just as effective in finding a tumor as a breast self-exam. So how important it is to really discover and learn how to do a proper breast self-exam.
And women who have had cancer, or women who have dense breasts, for instance, they can't rely on regular mammography to help find tumors that might be hidden amongst dense breast tissue. We now have ultrasounds which help as well, but in addition we can find a physiological response with the thermography. So it's just an additional helpful tool to have for women who have these problems. Now, of course, the bigger issue too is more women are finding out that radiation is a concern, and every time you have a mammogram, there's 2 views or 3 views or even more views if a woman's called back. So there's more radiation each breast every year for decades, and that definitely we know has an impact on even on the incidence of cancer of the breast.
When they turn about 40, that's when they're encouraged to go get their first mammogram. And I have to tell you, when I turned 40, I was a good little girl and I did as I was told. And I went to have my first mammogram. After I was finished, I said, I will never, ever do that to myself again. The experience was so traumatic, it was so barbaric, I was so humiliated, and I left the place in tears. And I said, no, there's got to be a better way. Before that, I didn't know anything about thermography.
When you look at the technology behind mammography, you're dosing your breast tissue with radiation along with compression. Now, you don't have to be a scientist to understand that radiation can cause cancer and that radiation can be very, very unhealthy for your body. And so consistent compression, consistent radiation to the breast tissue has been shown and documented in journals such as the British Journal of Radiation. It's been shown to possibly increase your risk of cancer and causing mutational problems up to 6 times because of the low dose radiation. Think about what if there was a micro tumor in your breast and you add that compression and you add the radiation. What do you think that may do to increasing your risk of growing that tumor because of the radiation and the compression? Here's another quote from the British Journal of Radiology. It says, low energy X-ray radiation from mammography causes DNA damage that may result in the increased risk of breast cancer. So again, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that radiation may cause cancer.
Proponents of mammography tell you that it's very little radiation. In fact, it is very little radiation in terms of the amount of rods, radiation absorbed doses that come out of the camera. What they don't tell you is that if you go through a screening at an airport, you're getting that much radiation when they screen you in a 6-foot window. When they're doing a mammogram, they're doing it at a 6-inch window. So they're taking that same amount of radiation and compressing it into a very small surface area.
You have to compress the breast as much as possible, and the instructions are press down on those glass plates till it hurts. And once it hurts, you know you've got it just about right. And if women have really dense breasts, they can't compress it enough. Well, they have to put about 4 pounds of pressure per square inch on that breast in order to get it to compress properly. It takes 2 pounds of pressure per square inch to rupture the capsule of a cancer. And so the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force said, wait a minute, you are actually creating the spread of cancer by rupturing the capsule every time you do a mammogram.
And there's no instructions about anything that you can do to lower your risk. So for me, it was like, so you go in and it's like a game of Russian roulette. You know, what year is it going to get me? And because I had so much work with breast cancer patients, you know, and all I see are breast cancer patients, it's like, you know, your view of the world gets skewed when you're seeing so much of that. And so for me, it was like not a matter of if I was going to get breast cancer, but when I was going to get it is how I was feeling. And I thought, okay, that's not really a good place to be. And you know, to go in and feel like there's nothing you can do and you're playing this game of Russian roulette again, it's like the most disempowering thing. And I thought, I don't want to live my life that way.
I've been a breast imager for over 20 years, so I know firsthand how painful it is to have a woman who's been getting regularly screened for breast cancer come in with a new lump that turns out to be a cancer. And she's completely devastated because she's been doing the right thing and yet gets a breast cancer that wasn't detected by screening. The reason that happens is because of dense breast tissue. And the problem is that on a mammogram, dense breast tissue looks white and cancer looks white. So it's been described as trying to pick out a snowball coming at you in a blizzard. You just can't see it coming. This will show you what I'm talking about. This is a woman with very little breast density, and here's a woman with almost a whiteout breast density. Both of them have a 7 millimeter invasive breast cancer. The woman without dense breast tissue, you can see her little cancer right there. This woman, you can't see her cancer. It actually turned out to be at about 12 o'clock somewhere in this region, but it's completely covered by her dense breast tissue. So we have other tools, but women don't know to ask for them. In fact, most physicians are not even aware of this problem.
So what are the alternatives? What can you do? Well, we're talking about thermography, and thermography has been a technology that I personally adopted back in 2005, and it was very, very helpful for me in monitoring my health as I was going through my journey. Now, thermography is wonderful because there's no compression, there's no touching, there's no radiation. And basically the technology behind thermography is very simple. What it's doing is it's reading the infrared heat that's being emitted from your body, and it's picked up through the camera and translated into a software onto the computer as an image. Red indicates more heat. Blue and green is cooler, so that lets us know that there's less heat in that area. Now, what does heat have to do with your breast health? Well, we know that if we sprain an ankle, what happens? Inflammation sets in, it puffs up, it gets hot. Well, the same thing happens in your breast tissue. If there's an imbalance in the tissue, if there's physiological changes that are occurring that's causing more inflammation in the breast, whether it's hormone imbalance or whether it's the development of more blood flow to feed a tumor, that's called angiogenesis and neovascularity, or new blood flow, because cancer is very smart. It's going to create its own blood flow to feed that tumor. So if there's more heat in the breast area and there's specific patterns, then that can alert you to the fact that there's some issues going on in the breast. Now, thermography will not and cannot diagnose breast cancer or any type of cancer. What it can tell you, though, is that there are physiological changes going on in the breast tissue and can alert you and your physician to be very proactive about what needs to be done when it comes to your breast health.
Thermography, in my opinion, is the most misunderstood of all breast imaging. It's not a screening test for breast cancer. It really should be thought of as a risk assessment tool. I started doing thermography in my practice because I felt women who were seeking thermography were very underserved. They did not understand really what the test could or could not do for them, and were not receiving any accurate information at the places they were going.
What I've recommended ever since I've found this technology is thermography. Thermography measures the temperature change in the cells in your breast to allow the technician and the practitioner to know if you have rapidly dividing cells which are hotter than the other cells. And the difference in temperature may be very minuscule, but it can be measured. And that's the way to follow your breast health. The thermography can find some extra temperature changes or extra activity in your breasts long before anything abnormal can be diagnosed by mammography or by biopsy. And in the hands of naturopathic doctors or holistic doctors, we know what to do to detoxify the breast. We know to take extra magnesium, to use some castor oil packs, to detoxify the whole body, to use coffee enemas to detoxify the liver and support the hormones by detoxification. So we know what to do, whereas thermography will probably never catch on in allopathic medicine because they don't know what to do 5 years before the cancer shows up. They will wait on your tests until something shows up and then they'll do surgery. So it's really, much more effective to do the thermography, do it every year or 2 years, and not even wait for anything to happen, but follow a lifestyle where you're detoxifying, you're taking plenty of magnesium, and you never develop breast changes.
The one thing I did want to point out was that with a new 3D mammography, where there are multiple photographs or x-rays taken for the same mammogram, there's about a 1/3% higher radiation involved now. So even though they might be a better mammogram and you might be able to see more, it's going to be more radiation for that woman. So I think we're going to have to screen who gets those mammograms, who is going to be at risk for, who's going to take the risk for having higher radiation to find a cancer. And I think that's really important.
So then they tell me, we have this new thing called 3D mammography. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a 3D mammogram. And then again, what they don't tell them is before we take a 3D mammogram, we're going to take a regular mammogram, and then we're going to take 3D images using a CAT scanner, which means you're getting 3 to 4 times the radiation you were getting with a regular mammogram, and you're not getting any better resolution or any better answers. So we have this myth that's propagated upon the females of this country, because most men don't have mammograms, that mammograms save lives. Well, I don't understand that, because if a mammogram is showing you a tumor, after you already have the tumor, what are you going through for longevity? And what is the quality of your existence after that? And more importantly, going back to Dr. Brawley, did you really need all that anyhow? Because the mammogram is unable to differentiate between cancers. We understand that no diagnostic test that's available for breast disease diagnoses cancer. Biopsies diagnose cancer. Other tests will give you the idea that they might localize a lesion, but they don't diagnose cancer. So you now have women who are having biopsies, lumpectomies, mastectomies. I have women that come in and had mastectomies for DCIS. It's revolting. And we're going through all this with this great tactic of fear. If you don't have this done, you could die. If you don't have this done, it's going to spread through your body. And that's not based on science. That's based on the fear factor.
And because my mom had breast cancer, I thought, well, I'll get active with the American Cancer Society. So I was the spokesperson for the American Cancer Society on breast cancer issues. And I was trained to say that we don't know what causes it and we don't have any known cures. So the best thing that women can do are mammograms and breast exams in the hope of catching it early to save lives. And it was like, well, that didn't work for my mom.
The Nordic group, the Cochrane group in Norway, studies outcomes. They take data from all over the world and they look at the data outcomes, and they take these outcomes and they publish them, and they rarely offer opinions because they're data people. But they offered an opinion in mammography. So they went on to say that the best way not to have cancer is to not have a mammogram. Now that's an independent research study. In 2014, the country of Switzerland shut down mammography altogether. They shut down first all the new mammographic equipment and then offered a bill to shut it down altogether. In Italy, the Prime Minister of Italy, back in the early 2010, 11, something like that, made thermography the diagnostic test, what he called it, of choice in breast disease, even though there's still mammographic equipment. In Germany, it's the diagnostic modality of choice. In Poland, it's the diagnostic modality of choice. Most of the thermographic literature comes from Japan. In Brazil, there are thermographic cameras in emergency rooms because they're looking for various problems with fevers. So they're in most of the emergency rooms in Brazil. So we're a bit backwards here in this country. Even though the thermography started here, we're still behind the curve, mostly because of the politics and the FDA.
If you looked at the statistics in Sweden and New York, the women kept dying at the same rate. Oh, but they weren't dying of breast cancer. They were now dying from the effects of the treatment, from other cancers, from radiation, or from congestive heart failure, from the chemo. But they kept dying at the same rate. They just didn't die of breast cancer.
We completely gowned up. Looked like we were going to outer space. We had a special chemo hood, which is still used today. And we had a spill cloth inside the chemo hood. And if you were making a chemotherapeutic and you happened to spill a drop on the cloth, you had to bag it up, hazardous material, ship it out in special containers and all of that kind of stuff. And then I realized one day it hit me, all these precautions for the possibility of spilling one drop. And yet when I get done with this entire vial of drug is going into someone's veins. And that's when it struck me, there is something wrong with this.
We need to take a breath and recognize that the cut, burn, and poison approach to cancer is not the gold standard in terms of what we can do to promote our overall health and longevity. To make that your sole mode of therapy and then to start to poison the body further without trying to give your system the support to systemically reduce the inflammation that allowed the thing to occur in the first place is completely fallacious in my opinion.
I'm not saying that there's not a woman's life out there that has been saved by a mammogram, because there probably is. But if there's a woman over here whose life has been saved, then there's 5 over here that their lives were taken because of the radiation, because mammograms cause cancer. The groups that are saying, get mammograms, the American College of Radiologists, well, could they receive a benefit from that? Susan G. Komen, did they receive a benefit? Well, if you look at their benefactors, Siemens, GE, all the big mammogram makers, there's benefit. You have to look behind the scenes to see why certain doctors are recommending them and certain doctors aren't. Well, it all has to do with the money flow.
And they say, stay away from x-rays if you don't want to get cancer, and then they say, oh, you got cancer, let's give you some x-rays. There's something, it's cognitive dissonance there. So I think that all of that needs to be challenged. And then hidden behind all of that is the issue that the assumption is that, well, if we find a breast tumor, that's good because now we can treat it. Early detection is the key there, you see. But what are they going to treat it with? Oh, they're going to start treating it with radiation, perhaps? More cancer-causing procedures. They may try chemotherapy, which is destructive of the immune system, and that causes cancer. So in my view, it's just, it's crazy. I just have to say I'm not a doctor, and I want to tell everybody that up front. But from my independent research and the lessons I have learned, I think that would be the last thing in the world that I would want to do. Now, is that advice? No, this is a decision that everybody has to make for themselves. But I think before you run down that path, you ought to do some reading, get a second opinion, talk to people who have a different point of view, make up your own mind. I think it's the only way to go.
You should appreciate that there are other things you can do, and you can see other practitioners. So if you go to your general practitioner, and that person looks at you and says, you have got to have a mammogram. Well, what if you ask that person the question, can I do something else? And they say, absolutely not. The only thing you can do is have a mammogram. Well, there are alternatives, and you need to understand that there are alternatives, but more importantly, you need to understand it's your body, it's your health, you have a protected right to refuse to receive a treatment you don't want, and you have a right to pursue the course that you think is in your own best interests. And it doesn't mean that you have a right to unapproved medical devices or drugs. The law still prohibits that. But you have a right to choose alternatives that are legal, and those things can be available to you if you just look. It's out there. It's just sometimes difficult to find. But once you get locked into the right community of people, you'll see that they'll be able to guide you in finding those alternatives.
It's your body. You do not ever, ever have to get a mammogram again, period. The doctor or the nurse practitioner or whoever's trying to force you into that, just say no. Stand up, say no. And if you have to, say hell no. But one way or the other, say no.
We're all different. Some women are too young to have mammograms. Some women's personal values do not, they are not going to have a mammogram like myself. Like that would not be something I would ever consider. So is the federal government basically taking our rights away by demanding that we only use mammography and everything else is an adjunct to only that? That just doesn't make sense.
And so then I had another mammogram in 2009, and then in November of 2009, and then another, by 2010, it was just really bothering me to the point where I told my doctor, something is wrong. I know something is wrong. I can feel it. And then in July of 2010, I was lying in bed one morning and I found a breast lump. And I told my husband, I have a lump. And he says, well, you're going right back and you're going to ask this time for a mammogram again and make sure they can find it. Mm-hmm. So I made an appointment like the next day, called my doctor. I have a lump, doctor. He says, okay, we'll send you back for another mammogram. You had one back in November. Well, we'll send you again. Went back to the same place. And this time I told the technician, I have a lump. It's right here. And so I showed her. And so she did all the mammogram testing, and she says, I can't find it. And so I took her hand, I placed it on my breast. I says, can you feel it? And she says, yes, I can feel it, but I can't see it. And so she took the test, she did the test, and on the write-up on the test, it said very clearly, no malignancy, no suspicious findings, you're okay, it's all clear. So I was supposed to be just they were telling me that it's all up here, it's all in my mind.
I really didn't know what a diagnostic mammogram was. Well, the next thing you know, we're in the, the squishing machine, as I love to call it, and they bring it down nice and slow, and they bring it down and go, okay. And then I figured at this point, it's like, okay, that's enough. And that's when it was announced to me by the technician. They go, okay, hold on. The next part is going to hurt really bad. I'll be as quick as I possibly can, but the next part is going to hurt. And then that's when that machine slammed down on my breast so hard that I couldn't breathe. And fluid came from my nipple. And I had hung onto the machine so hard that I had bruises on my arm. I was so immediately traumatized. I was like almost like a zombie. Like you had just been in a car accident and you don't know what the heck happened. And I was just literally numb. And as I stood there, I saw other women coming into this imaging, and I thought to myself, I wonder what they're here for. Are they here for the same thing? Should I tell them? Should I tell them, don't do this? That I couldn't believe these people did this to me. That how could they be so callous? How could they not tell me ahead of time that this is what a diagnostic mammogram is? And oh, by the way, we notice in your reports that you have dense breasts, and maybe we can recommend something else for you. Because it was only through my own research that I had found out that there are other options for women as a whole. And then I also found out, in particularly for women who have dense breasts and fibrocystic and fluid-filled lumps and stuff like that, that there are other things that can be done to get a reading of what is happening in the breasts. And it was such a horrific experience, and I don't want anybody to go through what I went through. I told all my girlfriends, they were horrified. And I said, don't ever do this. Run as fast as you can. Never go through this. Never have a mammogram. Never allow them to hurt or damage or compromise your gland.
Another thing about mammograms is the compression of the breast tissue. And, as a woman, you instinctively know this is wrong. It's being smashed, it hurts, it feels like something's popping, it's not right. And I think it could have contributed to worsening of my condition, and I'm sure in many people's cases it does. When you squash something that's not good and you smash it and bruise the tissue, you're going to have leakage out into the surrounding area, perhaps traveling of cells and blood going out into the tissues and things. And I think that's really a danger another danger with mammogram beyond the radiation, just the bruising. And it's brutalizing. It's inhumane. There's no reason to treat a woman this way.
Though some of the radiologists in San Luis Obispo County did not welcome breast thermography and aggressively continued to campaign against it, a progressive radiologist in Santa Barbara actually invited me to image out of her practice. She totally understood and respected the value that physiological information could provide to her in serving her patients in a much more effective way by utilizing physiological information that she could now compare to the anatomical test that she already offered. Well, when she invited me in her practice, which I was thrilled, she wanted her staff to go ahead and have thermograms so they would understand the technology that they were offering there now. And so this is an image, unfortunately, of one of her staff members, a technologist who actually is one of the women that put you in the mammogram machines, and this is a high-risk thermogram. So that led to further evaluation, and unfortunately she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. So you can imagine how horrible the radiologist felt that she had missed that cancer for about 10 years.
I think that one of the tragedies of modern medicine, at least in this country, is that people have relied on mammograms for so long to diagnose breast cancer, and it really hasn't turned out to be as good as we wanted, and in fact may be dangerous. Patients are overdiagnosed, they're overtreated, and the treatments aren't benign by any means. Chemotherapy, radiation, for tumors that really wouldn't ever cause them a problem. But it's extremely hard for a patient to sit on a diagnosis of a precancerous lesion and not want to go and do everything they possibly can for it because they're frightened. And it really is all about fear. The media promotes this, the medical profession promotes this. It's a total waste of healthcare dollars for annual mammograms to be done for everybody. There's recent studies that have shown that an examination by a physician once a year is as valuable as a mammogram in terms of longevity. And on the mammogram side, more tumors are diagnosed, but they don't need to be, and they don't need to be treated. Patients are just living with a diagnosis of breast cancer when they really didn't need to at all. So there are other imaging techniques now that are more predictive. They may not be as good at mammograms as diagnosing a lesion, but they're more predictive. And we can see abnormalities in thermography, for instance, that are precursors to cancer and that can be changed with a change in diet, a change in medicine, a change in lifestyle.
Well, I didn't realize until I started to do the research that the mammograms can actually make the cancer worse, can break up tumors if you have them. It was really quite horrific how much damage the mammograms can do. And when I had my first breast thermography, which came off of the 20-some mammograms I'd had, it was difficult to work out whether the inflammation was actually caused by cancer or if it was the mammograms. And what was really noticeable was when I came back 3 months later, because we're treating this seriously, the healing was coming into play. You could see that I was still at risk of cancer, but the inflammation was going. So I have to assume that a lot of that inflammation was actually caused by the amount of mammograms. And that just made the job harder of seeing immediately how we were going to cure this.
Mm-hmm. So when you're having thermograms, you're able to come back every few months and kind of monitor your progress and see it for yourself?
Well, there's no danger to you. Mm-hmm. And it's non-invasive, it doesn't hurt. And all you do is you come in and you strip down, and it's I was explaining it to my 17-year-old son. I said, it's like being on Predator, if you ever watched the movie, because you see the heat, and it's really, really cool. And because I felt this needed to be taken seriously, rather than wait a year between the thermographies, I've been doing it every 3 months to be able to see the progress. And I've just had my third one, and the progress is really noticeable, and I'm really happy.
Well, what if we could find a disease process occurring earlier? Well, that's what thermal imaging is about. Long before something ever developed that was imageable, that would cast a shadow or reflect sound waves, there was a process going on there. Because cells, as they go bad, they produce heat, they produce nitric oxide, they produce inflammation, and all of that is imageable. And part of the process which causes that initially is lymphatic congestion. That is also imageable on infrared imaging or thermography. So we can see the causative factors of disease coming down the road with thermal imaging and therefore prevent the disease from ever happening. Wouldn't that be awesome to never have to treat a disease, but to prevent it.
So thermography is a wonderful tool to have to assess your breast health. Now, is it 100% accurate all the time? No, just like any other test is not 100% accurate all the time. According to statistics, it's typically between 90 to 97% in finding physiological changes in the breast tissue. And that's a pretty significant number. And what most people don't realize is that thermography has been around for many, many decades. And there are over 800, possibly closer to 900 now, independent studies that have shown the benefits and the technology of how useful thermography can be.
So starting with thermography to monitor for subtle physiological changes starting in your 20s. A 20-year-old woman could have in her 20s could have a thermogram maybe every 3rd year, but it helps her engage in knowing exactly how her breasts work and not having that attitude of that fear-based culture that we seem to have created of just crossing our fingers and hoping that we don't get cancer. So every year when a woman goes in and gets a mammogram, she's basically crossing her fingers and hoping that she's not told probably the most devastating news that she'll ever get in her life.
When you see that there's these technologies that we have failed to embrace and choose the exact opposite, it makes you wonder, what are we really doing in healthcare? Why have we failed to first do no harm? Where did we go wrong that we lost our prime directive? We blind ourselves to hearing information that doesn't fit our paradigm. And that's where we really need to change as a society. We need to be willing to take our truth, whatever it is right now, and put it off on the side and truly open our mind and our heart and study things out if there's a chance that what we're doing might be doing somebody else harm. That's got to happen.
Welcome everyone, this is Dr. Mercola, and today I'm joined with Gaia Powell, who has a really passionate interest in breast cancer and breast cancer screening, largely related to the fact that her mother died in 1991 from breast cancer. So there is a large industry that has evolved out of this. Mammography is ionizing radiation. There is just no question, it's non-controversial. It increases your risk of cancer. The question is, how much does it increase it? This physiological alternative that you're referencing, which is an interesting way of referencing it, I hadn't heard that approach before, but it makes a lot of sense, just like taking your oral temperature. You're looking for signs of temperature change. And with mammography, you have ionizing radiation. But with thermography, there is no radiation, but you are measuring a form of heat radiation that you are making, that the instrument's not making, that you are making. And the sensor is detecting your radiation. And the reason why it's so effective is because it detects it at a far earlier stage, because typically it detects it when it's not seen by mammography, when it's in this inflammatory condition. And part of the process of inflammation is increase in temperature, which is what this device detects.
It's much more empowering. I mean, I guess my whole goal and my life mission now is to make sure that women have all of their information, all of their facts about the strengths and weaknesses of all of our options, so they can make the decision that is best for them. Because I know how fear-based it is. I was there with my mother when she got diagnosed, and immediately it's like you're going across the hall, you're having this thing taken off, you know, without, you know, they're expecting women to make decisions when they're basically being chased by a lion. Like you're in the most incredibly stressful situation that you've ever had in your life, most likely, because you're fighting for your life or you're fearing for your life, and now you have to make all these life-altering decisions. Well, ladies, nobody wakes up with those decisions but you. You know, not your doctor, not your oncologist, radiologist, surgeon. It's about taking a breath and not being forced into anything you're not comfortable with, having a mammogram or a thermogram or anything that you're not comfortable with. And especially once it gets to a more serious situation, your hair is not on fire. So I just want to make sure that women have all of their information so they can make the most you know, the best decision for them personally.
Important message that tends to be suppressed quite effectively by these large corporate interests that have billions of dollars or tons or maybe even hundreds of billions of dollars to be generated through the traditional diagnostic
Absolutely.
process
It's
that's
quite
being
the
used
machine.
commercially. Yeah, and it is a machine.
Yeah, don't get gobbled up by the machine.
So every woman's unique, and she should determine with her doctor what are the best screenings that would be best for her.
Best screening and what's acceptable to them, because even MRI scan, which is our gold standard, requires that women have intravenous injections of gadolinium, and gadolinium is a heavy metal. And so that heavy metal gets directly input into your veins and has to get excreted. And we know that there's kidney and skin problems with that for some people. So it's not necessarily safe for everybody.
For a woman to go up against the paradigm that is now in existence takes a lot of courage. It's not an easy thing to do, and I applaud every single one of my women that are strong enough, and they're finding strength in numbers. And it gives me the chills because they're coming into me and they're saying, just last week a woman was she was getting ready to have a mammogram. She said, "No, I can't do it. I can't do it." And she literally walked out. Her doctor dismissed her from the practice, and she said, "I don't care. I'll find a doctor that I can relate to." These women want to have a conscious conversation with their doctor. They want to be listened to. These are smart women. These are women who are reading. They're listening to webinars and summits. They're constantly educating themselves. They're in touch with their bodies. They know their bodies. They know what's going on. So why are you putting yourself in that position when there are alternatives? And thermography is for me, was the most simplest, painless, obviously right there, picture in front of me of what was going on with me. And take the time, do the research, take the time to think about how you feel about this. And not only how you feel about this, but what you've heard and where you got your information. That is so critical because we just are so bombarded with fear that we make our decisions from that place. And when you can make a decision from the other side of hope and change and love for yourself, what a blessing.
Thermography is the most incredible tool in our arsenal for prevention because we can see inflammation, we can see lymphatic congestion while they're in their earlier stages so that we can roll the stone back, so that we can move that backwards and bring the tissues back to full health without some of these dramatic interventions that we see that can not only mutilate people's bodies, women's bodies, and shorten their lives because of the treatments. But it's about prevention, it's about health, it's about maintaining your breast and keeping your breast on your chest where they belong.
And I went in that week and I was very professionally done. I was very happy, but I had no idea if it would help. But I noticed when she took the pictures, right away, me, a lay person, doesn't know anything about thermography, I looked on the pictures, I could see a huge difference right away between one side and the other side. One side was nice and purple and blue and cold. The other side was like a big thunderbolt of white and yellow and red across my breast. And right away it said, you are at very high risk of having cancer or about to have cancer. You need to see your doctor right away. You have a very big difference between the heat that shows up on one side of your breast. I found out later it was because cancer cells produce their own blood system or their own vascularization. And it's the vascularization that thermography is measuring, the heat that's being produced in those little blood vessels. Had I known there was another way of finding a baseline and for your breast health, and then following it year by year to see if there's any changes. And that's what I found that thermography offers.
Thermography provided a very thorough view of the health of the breast something I've never seen before. There was no pain, no discomfort, nothing. It's absolutely wonderful. It's like somebody taking a photograph of you from a distance. Except for, your boobs are naked, that's all.
It's a wonderful use for thermography to actually take it into, let's say, college campuses. We introduce it to women when they're young and educate them about, okay, here's something that we can use, completely harmless. It's just a picture of the breast, but it shows us the physiological state, if you have inflammation or not, which is important for every chronic disease. You can do this and then also educate them early, about what do you need to avoid, what do you need to favor, what impacts it. Because youthful people, they think that they're invincible. And so they can eat, horrible stuff and drink excessively and, they're going to be okay. But like I said, I was, actually working on women in their 20s. So the earlier we can get them, the earlier we can get them involved in their own health, and really it's something that's going to allow them to have a tremendous change in their overall health. And to me, it's like such a great access point to get young people to get interested in their health and start making healthy changes.
If you can see a picture of the heat in your body, know where your inflammation is, and regularly check on that, you'll notice the changes. And that's what we're going to be looking for in your body. What are the changes? Those are going to be your red flags. At the end of the day, I think self-care is what's going to help with preventing disease.
I wish I'd had the same knowledge. I wish I had been aware. And I hope that what we're doing now is making people more aware, women more aware, that there is another diagnostic tool. Not expensive, doesn't hurt, isn't invasive, but it can save your life.
So as it turns out, a few years later, I reached out to Dr. William Ashley, one of the radiologists who had originally campaigned against thermography, and me personally. He actually wrote letters to some of the doctors I was working with, including the radiologists in Santa Barbara, discouraging them from working with me. So it was very, very upsetting and disturbing, but it also inspired me to make this film. So when I reached out to him, I was surprised because he agreed to actually talk to me. So I went in, I talked to him, and he actually told me that he completely remembered me. He remembered meeting me years ago, and he now admitted that he no longer offers mammography and also does not consider it to be the gold standard. And I asked him, I said, oh, that's amazing. Would you be willing to go on camera, or at least, come out with a public statement to warn women about that, or to share that information of your conclusions? I mean, because he's been doing mammograms for, over 30 years. And he declined to. He said that he was getting ready to retire and he would rather not do that. But he did encourage me to reach out to one of the other radiologists that campaigned against breast thermography, Dr. Fred Vernacchia, and he thought maybe Dr. Vernacchia would be willing to share information with me. And unfortunately, he declined to be interviewed or speak to me.
Women really do have to become their own advocates as far as healthcare is concerned, but particularly breast cancer.
I've thought, what a great tool. Now they've got multiple resources to go back on this investment that they've put into themselves in both time and money and resources with my office. And I think it's wise for people to do that anywhere that they go. If they're walking into a doctor's office and a doctor knows that they're being recorded, the level of honesty goes up, because there's this certain fear in the back of every doctor's mind that if they're giving information that might be more party line rather than what they truly know, they're probably not going to let it come across their lips. And the patient's going to get a higher level of care if they know that the interaction's being recorded. Not in a spy-like fashion, but just to keep all parties accountable.
What do you think about hormones and how they affect women's health, and then possibly how they could lead to cancers, or how does that, I mean, there's a lot of fear based around estrogen.
Yes, I hope that fear is diminishing. I'm a very pro-hormone oncologist, which is like an oxymoron. So estrogen and progesterone, testosterone, all of those hormones help regulate our health. They help keep us in good shape. They help regulate other hormones such as insulin. So, which is an important hormone as we get older. A lot of adults become more insulin resistant. So believe it or not, estrogen and testosterone help reduce insulin resistance. So overall, that helps improve our health, and not only does it keep our skin looking nice, I always tell women, if your skin's looking nice on the outside, the skin on the inside has to be kept in good health as well, or looking good too. So I am pro-hormone. And there's more and more data coming out that estrogen alone actually reduces the risk of breast cancer by 23%. Can you imagine that? That's like the biggest risk reduction ever. But nobody wants to talk about it very much.
To balance your energy. We are energetic beings. We are only 1/1000th physical matter. The rest is all energy. So how do we change that energy? How do we keep that energy balanced? We can use technology and tools and art like chiropractic and acupuncture and reflexology and massage, exercise, getting proper sleep, making sure your hormones are balanced is such an important aspect of that.
It's really interesting when I ask audiences how many people think your genetics has a major impact on whether you develop breast cancer or not. Hands will come up. Well, genetics means practically nothing. So usually they go, well, it runs in my family. Half the time it's because you all ate the same, you had the same lifestyle, and so that's why, it's higher in your family. Now there is a genetic form called the BRCA gene mutation 1 and 2. And we used to think that, our DNA was just this static molecule, kind of the information for our anatomy and physiology, and that it didn't change. Well, since we mapped out the human genome, there's been all sorts of new information that we've gotten as far as the fact that everything affects our DNA and how it expresses itself. So every food that we eat, it gets broken down into these little chemicals that will actually hook onto the DNA and turn certain genes on and turn certain genes off.
I know genes fit in there someplace, but they're way down in the single digits. Most everything that we do, we can change. In fact, we now know that we can code around bad genes. So just because you have a bad gene is no reason to do anything drastic like losing your breast, because it is not, the genes are not the be-all to end-all. Genes are just building materials. And what we think affects that, what we do, what we put in our body, and how we manage it all is so much more important than a gene. And we now know that the body can code around bad genes, literally code around them under the right circumstances. So don't let that gene thing get you caught and make you do something that you might regret.
Because in the moment, it was the first time I'd heard about it, and I was like, test me, I need to know. I don't want to suffer the same fate as my mom. And even within the week or the 2 weeks and the 3 weeks after that, I really started thinking about it. Do I want to know that I have a gene that might mutate and might give me cancer? As a woman, I already know I have bullseyes on my chest. And if I love my body and I take care of it and I understand what's going on with it, then I don't necessarily know if I need to know that I have this lurking little villain inside my body that might make it worse for me. And so having had a discussion with other people who I care about in my life, finding the support I needed. You don't want to walk around being the only person who's thinking outside of the box. You need some positive reinforcement. I talked with my parents about my decision to not be tested for the gene, and they supported the fact that I didn't want to manifest this disease. I wanted to just live my life and be happy.
When I see women that receive their genetics and they find out that they have the gene that potentially would facilitate cancer if the circumstances were adverse in their life, and they go get a mastectomy, my jaw drops. I'm like, okay, you didn't even have a problem? And you decided to remove tissue? I'm sorry. That's when we've really, the train has completely derailed from the tracks. Those types of actions create much more inflammation and scar tissue and problems down the line than the supposed benefit of avoiding a cancer. Because remember, a cancer in the breast is not a cancer just in the breast. It's an inflammatory process in the whole body, and it just manifests in that tissue.
When we're looking at health and wellness and doctors healing in this fashion, it feels barbaric to me. It's very hard for me to hear about women and about doctors who are women who are suggesting these types of surgeries to their patients. I find it unnecessary. If a diagnosis is made, then I think options should be made about how we're going to treat this breast cancer that has shown up. But until then, I find no reason to go in and cut out breasts.
Of course, you're first in shock. The shock is so bad that sometimes you go numb. You feel like you've just been hit by a Mack truck. You have no idea what to do next. But the doctor's in front of you telling you, okay, we can schedule you for surgery next Thursday. Will that fit in with your schedule? And you want to say, just a minute. I don't know anything yet. I didn't have cancer in my family. I didn't have friends that had cancer. I didn't know anything yet. And I wanted to tell him, wait. I mean, I've had this in my body for the last, for sure, 2 years, who knows, 5 years growing. I need a week or two to figure out what to do. I didn't know how long I needed, but I needed some time just to breathe and figure out how to get control back.
What's very difficult for her to deal with is all of the flack that she gets from her family, her friends, her doctors, her surgeons who are now involved, all of those people that are using fear and bullying actually to get her to do. I guess I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they have her best interests at heart, but she needs to get in tune with herself and make an educated decision as to what's best for her.
There are other things that you can do to find out if there's issues going on in your body when it comes to your breast health. There are blood tests. They're now called liquid biopsies that can help you to determine if there's the presence of cancer cells in the body. Some will determine if there's free cancer cell DNA in the blood. Others will look at specific hormones and enzymes to see if there's cancer cell production. Another important test to look at are inflammatory markers. If there's inflammation in your body, then that may be an indication that there's some imbalances going on. So whatever technology and tools you use, make sure you keep a pulse on your health.
Share the information that they have with their sisters, because we're all in this together, and this is important. You know, I personally can't, it breaks my heart when I see these women coming in scared out of their minds, and the pain that they're going into, the emotional and mental and physical pain that they're in. It's just heartbreaking to me, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Be empowered, be proactive. Don't fear cancer the way traditional medicine has taught us to fear cancer. Cancer is a metabolic disease, and there's a reason why cancer has developed. Cancer is present in the body because there's an imbalance in your health, in your emotions, there's toxicity, your immune system is suppressed, and these are all things that you can work on to move towards creating vibrant health.
I think if you back away from the issue of breast cancer and just deal with cancer in general, if I were told or suspected that I had cancer, I wouldn't need to run out and test and see, well, do a biopsy or something, because we know if you cut into a tumor, sometimes little cells go into the bloodstream and they'll travel around, and so the act of testing for it actually spreads it. I mean, okay, if you suspect that you have cancer, or if I suspect that I have cancer, I'm going to start treating it. I don't have to test it. I said, well, what if I do, what if I don't? If I have a natural treatment, if I have natural treatment that builds the immune system, that's supportive of my health and not destructive, well, then there's no harm in treating it. Well, I believe that nutrition, I think the cure for cancer is found in nutrition.
Now, we know that evidence-based natural medicine has thousands of published studies that help us to understand how these herbs and these plants affect our body by boosting our immune system, by detoxing the body, as well as killing and targeting specifically cancer cells and cancer stem cells, which are the root of developing cancer.
It's the opportunity to do kind of an inventory of your entire life. How are you eating? What are your relationships like? There's so much information about the relationship between breast cancer, diseases in our body, our emotions, and our relationships have a huge impact. So everything. How's your relationship with your spirit or God or whatever belief system that you have? And so it's really this opportunity to kind of revamp your whole life so that it's in alignment with who you are and achieving the best health. And when people take that on, it's like, I've seen people who've had stage 4 cancers where it's metastasized everywhere, and it's gone away.
Heal your emotional wounds. Now, this is typically the most challenging and the most difficult one because we're real good at handling tangible things, but when it comes to taking time to heal our heart, to take time for ourselves, to heal the past, heal the emotional wounds, to forgive ourselves, forgive others, that's not easy. And I know I included this essential because that was a very big one for me, and all the junk and the garbage I'd been carrying on my whole life. So it's very important to take the time to heal the emotional wounds.
The takeaway really should be that Western medicine is backwards, that we are looking to make people unsick, as opposed to Eastern medicine, which is looking to keep people well. Eastern medicine has been around a whole lot longer than Western medicine, so they must be doing something right. And I encourage women to be proactive in their health.
I think we need to really examine what's going on in the health industry, health and wellness industry, with medical schools, with the amount of nutritional advice that doctors are given and taught in those medical schools, and really examine how much they know about the preventative measures found through lifestyle and diet. I think we're waking up. I think doctors are coming on board. I think there's a bridge that's happening, and I'm thankful for that, because nothing is lost more than if you lose your health. If you lose your health, you have nothing. It doesn't matter how rich you are, how famous you are, how wonderful you are. If you lose your health, you lose a lot of hopes and dreams, and you lose all of your life force, and you lose your ability to carry on your work.
Teach your children, teach your daughters breast health right from the beginning, to be in charge, to be responsible for what they put into their bodies, for how they take care of their bodies in general, and especially the breast.
I think patients need to be involved in their own care, and they need to find practitioners who will team up with them to do so. It's not just a matter of seeing a patient once a year and getting them on their way. I think that a patient needs to be looked at as a whole person. We need to look at nutrition, lifestyle, medications, and just anxiety and stress. These are the things that a patient should be, a woman needs, in my opinion.
And I was asked a little while ago what kind of advice I would give, general advice for somebody with cancer. And I was thinking about that, and how do you summarize it? I would say there are two things. The first thing would be to respect nature. And the second thing would be to question authority.
I hope you will join us in becoming a Hippocratic Oath angel. Let's link arms and create a new paradigm focused on education, empowerment, prevention, positive action, and healing, so we can ensure a healthier and safer world for our daughters.
I hope that this helps your life and proves it. And please be mindful of your health, and don't give away your rights to anyone.
I think we need more education instead of medication. And I know there's many that feel the same way. So thank you very much. And I always say salud. The word salud comes from salute, which means to your health.